All right, 2017 Ford Transit rear brake pad replacement. Here's what you're gonna need: impact gun with a 22 for the lug nuts, 3/8 ratchet, a 13 socket, a 15 socket, an adjustable wrench, wire brush, a file, a tool to turn in the rear caliper pucks, thread locker, brake grease. I recommend this one, the orange, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. If you need the rubber hardware, this is the part number I have for the rear: 300-16-19-2A. I recommend the factory brake pads. That's the part number there, and I'll explain a little bit about that more as I get into it. Some brake cleaner, a jack, and a jack stand. And the front wheels are secure. Do that on both sides so it doesn't roll. All right, so I have the front wheels secured so it can't roll. And we got the floor jack. I'm using a piece of wood to make the axle, but you could also go right underneath here. You have to do that for the passenger side for sure, because there's no room, or go right underneath the differential, but I don't really like doing that. So we're just going to jack it up real fast and we'll take off the wheels. So make sure your emergency brake is off and your front wheels are secured. Alright, we're going to take off the wheels with a 22. If you don't have an impact, you're going to have to break the wheels loose, well, the lug nuts loose with the van on the ground. So we'll take the wheel off and I'll bring you right back in a second. Alright, so this is what you'll see once you get the wheel off. I changed these rotors before. These rotors are still good. I would not recommend changing the rotors unless they're warped, they're too worn down, because that's a big job. You have to pull the whole axle assembly out. Alright, but brakes are pretty straightforward. It's going to be a 13 here, and then another 13 on the bottom. And then the 15 is for the caliper bracket. That's optional, but I'm going to take off the bracket and clean it, and I'll talk a little bit about that whole ordeal. Alright, so this top caliper pin bolt is going to be a 13 deep, where you're going to have to use a wrench. Then all in the bottom, it's going to be another 13. You can use this a shallow, or just use a wrench. It's up to you. I got them broke for you ready. Alright, I got the two 13s out of the way. This is going to slide back, and we're going to hang it up for now. Okay, I'm taking off the 15s. Once they're loose, you take them off by hand. They're both the same size, so you don't have to worry about the order of them. I'm going to bring you guys back once I get the caliper bracket off. Alright, by now you should have something like this. You should have these two 13s, these two 15s, and you should have the bracket off. It's going to come off with the pads, okay? we're going to pop these pads out. You see these were worn pretty far down. Alright, so with the bracket we're just going to clean up real fast. And we want to make sure that these pins are free. Now, the bottom one almost never gets seized. The top one almost always gets stuck. Okay, because there's a rubber bushing in there. And we're going to talk a little bit about that once I get this thing cleaned up. But it's going to be pretty stiff, doing one-handed. And it's seizing it pretty good. Alright. And there's a rubber boot on there. We're going to have to replace it, okay? Alright, so this pin is okay, but this pin had a lot of corrosion in it. So we're just going to clean it up. A little bit of brake cleaner inside. And I use... I'm trying to do everything one-handed. Bear with me. And I use a wire brush on a drill. And then we'll put this one over here. We might as well clean that one out. You may not have to do this depending on where you live. Alright. I'm just going to take you along. I'm going to pop the hardware off. Okay? And I'm going to file with the caliper file right in between here. Not much, just taking the surface rust down, okay? I'm going to do it on the other side. And then we'll clean this whole thing off with brake cleaner and a wire brush. Alright, it's a good idea to have a cardboard box just to catch the brake cleaner. So I wire brushed this whole thing down. I'm going to brake clean it. So you just want to get the rust out from the grooves, which most of it's all out. And you want these pins, the cylinder, to be clean. And that's pretty clean in there. And you can also test it, make sure the pin comes in and out. This one has to get cleaned a little bit more, I think. Let's see, it's going in. Yeah, once some grease gets in there, it's going to be fine. But that needs to fall in free. Alright, so we're probably going to clean this one up a little bit more. Alright. Alright, so I cleaned this whole thing up. The pins fall in and out real easy. Now, what I learned from working on this Transit and doing brakes is you really have to pay attention to what grease you use. So I would say either use the factory grease from Ford, the Motorcraft grease, or I found that this grease works good. What happens is if you use regular grease, it causes the rubber to swell. You can see the difference in the new rubber.
to the old ones. And even this piece, if you use the wrong grease, it causes it to swell, and then it gets stuck and the pin drags. You get uneven brake wear and sometimes a squeal. All right, so you got to use the right grease. So I'm gonna grease these up. I'm gonna install them, and then we'll put the hardware on, and I'll bring it back. So you can see the size difference. It's substantial. Just what the grease does, it just causes everything to swell up. So make sure you're using the right grease. And this is like the #1 issue, is that if you use the wrong grease on this, it swells inside the sleeve, and then it causes it to drag. So, all right, I greased this up. I'm gonna put this bushing in, or the boot, and we'll get everything assembled. All right, with the boot in place, it should sit. Now it should have, this glare's killing me. It should have a little spring to it, but not that much. Sometimes you get air trapped in there. So I just take a flathead screwdriver. I'm trying to do it one-handed. And I will go ahead and lift that boot back just gently and purge the air out as I push down. There you go. Something like that. And then you'll see it won't be sticking up as far. And then obviously wipe all this extra grease out of the way. Alrighty? I'm gonna wire wheel or wire brush the surface rust off of this rotor. Again, it's still good. I measured it. It's got the minimum thickness. So it's gonna take all the surface rust off. Alright, I'm gonna finish this off camera. You don't need to watch me scrub a rotor down. Alright, I wire brushed it all, a little bit of brake cleaner. And that's good to go. I'm gonna put the 15s back in to hold the caliper bracket in with a little bit of thread locker. So I'm gonna do that now. Alright, so I'm using the factory brake pad kit, and this one includes the bolts. Ford likes you to use these one-time bolts. You can reuse them in a pinch, but that's not what they're designed for. So when you buy the kit, it's going to come with two new bolts, and then the hardware. And then also in here, the pads. Another common mistake that people do is this pad has a notch in it, and this pad does not. This notch, that little dimple, has to match up. Focused, it has to match up on the caliper puck. So I'm not sure if you saw this. So the dimple on each side of the caliper puck, and that's what the brake pad has to catch into. Now we have to spin this in, and they're backwards. So the driver's side should spin right and the passenger side should spin left, but I'll double check that in a second. Alright, so the driver side spins to the right, like what I said, and get this out of the way. The passenger side spins to the left. I remember the first time I did these brake pads and rotors, I thought I had a seized puck. So this one spins to the right on the driver's side, the passenger side spins to the left. So I'm gonna spin this in off camera because I don't have that many hands. Alright, so I got that spun in, and as I'm spinning it in, I notice that there's an arrow right there pointing to the right. So that's probably helpful to know. And I would imagine that this dimple is where you want this to match up for the brake pad. So I'm going to line it up there and see if the brake pad slides right in. Alright, so we're going to pop the hardware in, and it's pretty straightforward. My big fat hands. But you want to make sure that it's got this little groove right there, and it's got this little tang that sits in there. See, it's locked in with that little tang. And I got one more clip. Let me find it. Oh, there we go. Alright. Now these brake pads are a little different. So this one doesn't have the dimple. That's going to go on the outside. This one has the dimple. I don't know if you can see it. Got that little dimple, and that's what the caliper puck locks into. So we're going to pop this bad boy in. I normally have a lot of luck starting with at the top and then popping the bottom one in. Alright, it's going to sit in like so. Put that one in. Alright, we got the pads on. And our puck is turned in, and we're going to set it into place. And I'm going to try and do this with the camera, but I don't know how lucky I'm going to be. It's not easy doing it one-handed. I'm gonna have to turn the camera off. Alright, so line the arrow, line the dimple up at the top of the arrow, and then it'll go right onto the groove. And now we're back on. Okay? And I'm gonna use the two bolts that came with the hardware, because they already had the thread locker on there. So it pays to buy good quality pads because it comes with stuff like this. Alright, you should not have to force the caliper back in to line up. If you find that you have to force it, you have to keep adjusting the puck until it lines up on the rear brake pad. Alright, and the new hardware from Motorcraft is also a 13, and it doesn't have that stud, so you should just be able to tighten this up. And that's all there is to it. You're going to have to pump the brakes a couple times and ratchet the emergency brake to get the puck to come back out, okay? And that's it. Pretty easy.